All right, good afternoon. My name is Mr. Koble, history teacher for 8th grade in San Diego. And today we're going to be learning about the Articles of Confederation, or as I like to call it, America's first mistake. So we're going to get going, and we're going to look at what happens after the Revolutionary War ends and the United States becomes its own country. Well, we got to make our own government, and this is their first effort. We don't start with the president and the Constitution immediately. We have this weird intermediary period. That's what we're going to learn about. So here's some note-taking advice. I do this for my 8th graders. You do not have to write down exactly what I say or exactly what is on the board. I say for taking notes, definitely abbreviate everywhere you can, put it in your own words, draw pictures if you need to. I think that's really helpful, along with don't just write what's on the board, kind of write the explanation that's going on with it. And the whole reason this video exists is let's say I'm going too fast in class or you didn't get everything, you can revisit this video later. You're like, oh yeah, that's what the Articles of Confederation are about. Or like, oh yeah, those are specific pieces of maybe why they were weak or something like that. Some vocab we're going to use a lot this unit is tyranny, is when one person holds all the power. It could be a king, a dictator, or an emperor, or a group of people. With the United States, maybe it's not as often, but with other countries around the world, a specific group of people holds a lot more power than the others and really dominates them. That could be tyranny as well. Democracy is a government where leaders are elected by the people or by representatives who are elected by the people. We have the latter in America. This is pretty straightforward. You should know what democracy is. Here's a couple more. Then these are probably newer. The first one is ratify. And this is to give your formal approval and sign a treaty or a political document. So for example, when teachers came back to school after COVID, the teachers union had to ratify the safety protocols and the minutes that we were expected to teach and work when we came back. So we had to give our formal approval of it. The last one is federal, and we're going to use this term a lot. So federal government is the government that makes decisions for the whole country, not just a state. So the federal government makes decisions that would affect every single state, the whole country, United States. And today, federal decisions happen in Washington, D.C., which is the capital. That's where Congress is, the president is, the Supreme Court. Federal government used to not be in Washington, D.C. The state capital, the federal capital of the United States used to be in New York City, actually. But anyway, that's a federal decision, affects the whole country. State decisions that would only affect California happen on the state level. And the state government exists in Sacramento for California. And if you're watching this in a different state, you should look up your state capital. That is where your state government makes state decisions that affect the state. Federal decisions happen in Washington, D.C. today because they affect the whole country. So a recap of what we previously learned about in the Revolutionary War. Colonists rebelled against the British because the king was a tyrant. So what happens is after the war, Americans are really scared of the government having too much power. They're very scared that their government will become a tyranny or tyrannical. Colonies win the war, thanks France, in case you didn't know that. So after the war, we still have some issues. We still have Native Americans fighting with Americans. We still have one of the big fears that loyalists had was, oh no, if the Patriots win this war, they're going to treat us horribly and things are going to get bad for us. And well, they weren't wrong. A lot of loyalists get their things stolen, their property burned, they get looted, attacked on the streets. A lot of them either kind of go into hiding and make a new identity somewhere else, or they move back to England. So that's what happens to loyalists. And the other big thing is you have the northern the northern states are in massive debt. So New York, Massachusetts, probably Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, maybe not Pennsylvania as much. These states are in very big debt because they have the most patriots fighting for them. So they have to pay their soldiers and they have the most destruction. So they have to rebuild things and they borrowed a lot of money from other countries too. So these northern states are in a lot of debt. The southern states really aren't in as much debt. They're more manageable. So what happens now? I'm not going to play the song because I'll get copyright infringement, but we have our own country. What's going to happen now? So here are some really big questions that are going to guide the country through the next kind of 100 years or maybe 80 years as the United States starts to expand and become their own government. And I really hope we don't have a civil war because we can't agree on the solutions to these questions. Wouldn't that be horrible if we had a civil war? Good thing that'll never happen. So we're going to have a civil war like 80 years later. But for right now, America has some questions that we need to answer before we start our own government. So the first question, and going through a lot of people's minds, are how are we going to protect our civil rights? We fought for these rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, but how are we going to protect them? We need to make sure our government, doesn't override a lot of our civil rights the way that the British king had when he was governing the colonies. 2, what are we going to do about slavery? This is going to be the #1 driver of US politics for the next 80 years, and it starts now at the foundation of America. Are we going to just kick the slavery can down the road, or are we going to address slavery? They choose the former. They kind of just let the problem linger. But it's kind of controversial to base your entire country off of this idea that all men are created equal, but at the same time having slaves and literally owning other people is a very hard line to cross. It's very hypocritical. You go against yourself. And funny fact, the person that said this, Thomas Jefferson, main author of Declaration of Independence, said all men are created equal and given God-given rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, while also having dozens of illegitimate children with his slaves, some of which were as young as 13, which is disgusting. So just throwing that one out there, a little bit controversial and hypocritical to not address slavery when you're saying all men are created equal. But anyway, number 3, how much power should a state have compared to the federal government? So how much power should North Carolina have compared to the United States? How much power should California have compared to the rest of the United States? Should a state be allowed to create a law that goes against what the federal government says? This is a really big issue, and it's really going to drive the lesson for today of how much power should a state have. The other thing that's going to drive today is, do we as a country want a big central federal government with a lot of power, or do we want a much smaller decentralized government where states really have a lot more control? This is the big question that's going to drive a lot of what's going to happen in the next 20 years when they're developing the Articles of Confederation, and then when they later develop the Constitution, is how big do we want and powerful do we want our federal government to be in Washington, D.C.? Once again, now Washington, D.C. The last controversial issue is how are we going to add new states? United States know even back then that they're going to expand. They don't know how much they're going to expand, but they know they're going to grow. How are they going to add new states? And what are they going to do about slavery? How are they going to address slavery in these new states? Well, that's an issue for the future. So I would pause it right now, and you should be able to write a short paragraph about how Americans' experience as colonists when King George was ruling them might impact or affect their thoughts about these big questions. So maybe how does living under British rule impact how they want to protect civil rights, or impact what they want to do about slavery, or impact if they want a big, strong government being able to tell them what to do? That might contribute to some of these questions. So go ahead and pause this video. You should be able to do that. Now resume this video. So here is their solution at first. Their first run at it, their first go at governing themselves, is called the Articles of Confederation. And basically in 1781, this is America's first document that set up the government for the first 13 states. This is their first try. This is their trial run. I like to call this America's first big mistake because it doesn't work out very well. We're going to find out why. So an overview is when the framers were creating this in 1781 after the war ended, they were very afraid of the federal government. They were afraid of having a strong central federal government, having too much power and being able to tell Americans what to do, and having them basically usurp or be more powerful than the states and the leaders that they elected themselves. So what they do in the Articles of Confederation is they start to give most of the power to the states on purpose. So the Articles of Confederation are purposefully made to make the government very, very weak. This is an intentional thing that they do because they don't want the feds to have too much power. So under the Articles of Confederation, there is one federal branch called Congress, and we're going to do this a lot later. And this means that there is only one group that is allowed to make whole country decisions. There's no Supreme Court, there's no president, there's no FBI, there's no CIA, there's no National Intelligence Agency, there's no Department of Justice. There's only one group for everything, and it's called Congress. And it's very different than our Congress today. Back then, this Congress, the AOC Congress, they only gave each state one vote. And they said every state gets one vote no matter what its size is, how many people live there, and those votes are going to go against each other. So, Mr. Koble, it sounds like AOC kind of sucks. Like, can't all be that bad. Well, no. There are some good things that come from this. The first number one thing is like, this is an attempt. This is our first attempt at making a national government and getting some form of national unity. So like, it's a trial run. They're trying their best. There's also a couple other things. So they got a couple land ordinances in there, which ordinance means like kind of a law or something that's passed. So they set up this land ordinance that sets up new land in the West for sale. We're going to have all of this land eventually become the United States. Well, how are we going to occupy it? How are we going to determine who buys it, who sells it, who lives there, and how much power they have and where territories are? Well, this is what happens is they divide up each of these areas into smaller areas that they can then subdivide into farther smaller areas and sell off later. It also makes free public schools. So, ayo, that's me. The other big thing is the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. And this is not only going to confirm these states as part of America, but it is going to abolish slavery in these areas. And this is really, really important because what happens is you start to see the answer to this first big question: what is the United States going to do about slavery in these new states, and how are we going to make new states? Yeah, this question down here, let me try to draw a little circle around it. How are we going to add states, and will they have slaves? This is the first big answer to that question of how are we going to create new states and will they have slaves? This is the first instance of them deciding, yeah, some states are not going to have slaves and we're going to decide that from the jump, and others are. So this is really the first instance of the United States coming to some sort of consensus on slavery. Now, what's bad about it? Everything else. Everything else is hot garbage. And I'm going to explain why. The federal government has no power under the Articles of Confederation. They really don't get to do anything. They can't collect any taxes. They can't raise their own army. They can't enforce really any laws or make any emergency decisions because they don't have a president or a king or any kind of executive to actually do things. Everything has to run through Congress, and that's a slow process. So federal government really can't do anything. There's no federal courts either. So there's no Supreme Court, and the states are responsible for making every single, judgment within that state on every single law. So you start to have states having these wildly different laws on the exact same things, and there's no consistency across the board. Really, you're not seeing a nation develop. You're seeing a very loosely put together version of 13 countries instead of 13 states. So states really have all of the power under the Articles of Confederation. The feds don't do anything. I mean, they do very little. Most of the things are done through this on the state level. So there's not really any sense of national unity. There's not really any national government aside from the one Congress that they have that's ineffective and slow. So you really kind of get this sense of the kind of united-ish states of America, where all the states are really doing their own thing, and they're cool with that. They want that. More bad things that happen, and you don't have to write all these down, but some of these are interesting. A lot of states have very different trade laws on the same thing. So you could sell something in North Carolina, and it'd be a 7% tax, and you would sell the same good in Massachusetts, and it'd be a 50% tax. Well, you're not going to be selling it in Massachusetts if you're going to get taxed 50% on it. So you're going to have these states develop wildly different things. Some trade goods are legal in some states, and some are encouraged to be sold. So it's very different. Another one is some states have different types of money. You would have to convert your dollars to you know, if imagine going to Mexico, you know, you convert dollars to pesos. Well, it'd be the same thing, but just crossing state lines to like Arizona and New Mexico and Texas. You'd have to, you know, possibly convert your money several times over, which would not be good. It wasn't good in any way. There's no uniform. States would also have different treaties with Native American groups. So you could have Georgia at war with like a Native American tribe, and then North Carolina be totally chill with that Native American tribe. There was no sense of unity in who's fighting whom. This would be the equivalent if like Arizona decided they wanted to go to war with Mexico and Montana was like, let's declare war on Iraq. And it was just the states fighting. That's super weird. There's no uniform army. Speaking of uniform army, the states could refuse to send soldiers if the US did go to war. So if the US went back to war with Britain like 3 years later, a lot of the southern states could say, you guys have fun. We're not sending our men up there to fight in your army. That's your guys' problem, not ours. So imagine like going to our war with Iraq and Afghanistan, and then a bunch of states just saying like, yeah, we're not going to send any of our men to serve there. Good luck. It wouldn't look very good at all. So the overall message behind the Articles of Confederation is that states did what they wanted, when they wanted, how they wanted, because they have almost all the power. States have all the power in the Articles of Confederation, and the federal government can't do anything. So why does it fall apart? Basically, it falls apart because the United States can't collect any taxes. They can't collect taxes and they can't pay off their debt. So you start to see it's really not going well. They start to see like this is not sustainable. Federal government has no power. States have wildly different laws. I guess that's part of also why the AOC fell apart, is because these laws become really poignant of how different they are. And there's not really much consistency. The nail in the coffin, though, for the AOC is that you start to see this event called Shays Rebellion. And what this is a big farmer rebellion where they get sick of all these taxes and then they revolt against the state Massachusetts House. And the Articles of Confederation, the federal government cannot assume an army. They can't make an army that can squash this rebellion of random like angry farmers. So this is kind of the nail in the coffin. And the framers and initial developers of the Articles of Confederation decide, you know, this just ain't gonna work. We need to think of something else. Which is gonna bring us to the Constitution. So overall, major points. Federal government has absolutely no power to do anything pretty much. The states kind of run the entire show. And this is the reason that this matters and why we care is A, it's America's first attempt at a country. And B, this debate over how strong the federal government should be versus how strong the states should be is still going on today. Politicians a lot today will argue that states have a certain right to implement their own rules and that the federal government should stay out. Other politicians say the opposite, that states shouldn't be allowed to do whatever they want when it impacts other people across the nation. So this is kind of the main lesson of where is this perfect balance between federal power and state power. And that's kind of what's going to lead us into the next section of the Constitution. Overall, here's a dank meme for you. Is this trash? Yes, the Articles of Confederation are trash. Put it in the dumpster, light the fire. Anyway, that's it. Hopefully this was helpful. Please get me sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends or something else that will give me money. Raycon. You know, I sell Marutron in my classroom. Maybe Marutron will sponsor me. Tweet this video at them. I don't know, have them reach out, give me some cash. Have a good rest of your day, and goodbye.